What is up, everybody, and welcome back to Cryptographics. And today I am super excited for this stream. I have been waiting and hoping for this stream for quite a while now, and I am pleased to introduce to you guys someone that's been in the community for quite a while. He has been absolutely probably one of the biggest assets of the community. He's a galaxy brain. He's helped me learn an absolute ton. So I have so much respect for him, and I appreciate all the knowledge that he's shared openly with the community. And I am super proud to present to you guys AXiS ALiVE. Welcome to the stream, brother.
Hey, man, thanks for inviting me. This is our first stream together. I'm happy to be here and just kind of roll with the punches and see where we end up. I know you'd mentioned before the stream that, hey, guys in the chat. How's everyone doing? You'd mentioned before the stream that, we can talk about some technical stuff, but then maybe branch out into some philosophical pieces as well, because without that, like, what's the point of crypto? So
Totally.
can't wait.
Yeah, man, me too. I'm super excited. So because this is our first time talking, a lot of people on my channel probably have not had the good fortune of hearing your name and hearing everything that you've been able to bring to the community and give out on your channel. So why don't we start with what we talked about in the green room, was just how did you get to where you are today? Like crypto into Hex, and then where you are now with everything that you know, and kind of what you're sitting with AXISAlive.com and AXiS ALiVE, the name.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, so I actually started in markets in like 2017. It was during the big parabolic bull run on Bitcoin. And at the time I was living in the city and with my buddy as a roommate, and he was like the nerd, he worked at a ISP firm as a network engineer, and so he was always kind of ahead of the curve in terms of the technology. And he had mentioned to me, so they're sitting there at the kitchen table, something along the lines of, "Hey, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin at $200 because now it's like $1,200." And he's like, "I missed the boat." And so that was like the initial conversation. And then he started talking about like mining it and how you could like earn coins or like legally print money. And to me, that was very interesting because about a decade prior, I had fell into the weeds and dug deep down the rabbit hole in terms of the fractional reserve banking system, and just not being that keen on the way that the fiat money system worked. And I was looking for solutions, or I honestly, I was in a bit of a despair that we might never have a solution to that problem, and when we would all be the general population would be wage slaves forever. But when I found out that you could legally print money through mining cryptocurrency, it totally changed the entire paradigm and has opened up a new window for a redistribution of wealth across the globe that's borderless, and it's easily transmissible, and it like a virus, it'll spread everywhere, and it's basically reset the foundation of what money means in this new world and what sound money means. And so I guess that was like the starting element that then shifted my focus away from despair and doubt into like, all right, well, let's see what we can do. Can we build a mining facility? And so I began working on a project to build out a data center, and we did a small data center in a small town, and put it together. And then 2019, during the up and down of that year, we were mining Bitcoin and Ethereum. And then going into 2020, obviously there was that big COVID crash, and so it was like looking pretty bad for mining at the time. But at the same time, this Hex coin, the shit coin that I'd bought a small bag of, on day 1 and day 2 of the launch a few months prior, started to moon, and I was like, that already had sparked my interest. But then, fast forward to the end of 2020, and I was like, okay, there's something more here, because at that point the price of Hex had hit a penny. And so I started to actually rotate out of my other holdings and get more positioned into Hex, because I thought that the inflation problem of the world had been solved in the form of the T-share, and that on the longest time frame possible, that this was going to succeed in a really big way.
Wow, that's cool. I had no idea that you went back to sort of the data center, and that's a cool perspective too, to think about, the mining side of things, solving the money problem, and then to see that also in Hex as well. That's really cool. So did you discover Richard first, or did you discover Hex first?
So I I found a it was normal for me to go on YouTube and just scroll and look for any kind of crypto content that I thought was it was mostly price related because to me that was the interesting piece of the pie. I liked the looking at the fundamental, like Cardano when it first launched, like the idea of what it could be, or like when Ethereum was, very relatively new in the thought of it being the world computer. Those ideas excited me, but at the same time, the price never did what the fundamentals were saying it could do.
Mm,
This is going back to like the 18 bear market, right? So to me, price was all that mattered, and I was very interested in that. And then, this Richard Hart character, I started seeing videos pop up, summer of 19, and when he was in Malta on stage at the Malta Bitcoin conference talking about Bitcoin Hex for the first time and how it was going to basically be what's the first thing you should do if you have programmable money? Well, you should program an interest component to it. And so that was already very interesting to me. And he was very persuasive in making you think that it could be a very like the asset could appreciate intensely. So I was already interested in the dream or the idea that this thing could take off one day. So for me, at the time when it launched, I didn't have a lot of capital. Most of it was tied up in the Bitcoin mining and Ethereum mining facility. So what I did have, I aped day one and had a little bit left over for day two. And that first stake ended in January of last year, and it ended up being a hefty sum, 220 some odd X up from the beginning price. So, or
wow.
from the time when I bought it, which was very high, right? It was like 3/10 of a cent was day one price. So, even with that in mind, it was, with the interest and everything, it ended up being a very fruitful thing. And of course, by this point, I had already, converted, so to speak, and went heavily in. I think like anybody's core crypto position should have a hex staking ladder as a part of it.
Right. Right. That's cool. That's so cool. So then when you heard about, so you got in basically on day one of the AA, and Pulse Chain came around. Were you on the same line of thinking of like, okay, Richard's built this one thing that mooned? Were you very keen on Pulse Chain as well, or were you like kind of curious about it? Did you have skepticism about when it first came out? Like, what were you going through when Pulse Chain was first announced?
Yeah, I had this is going to be a surprise probably maybe for some people, but I had doubted it. Was very skeptical of the fact that Richard was going to try to go head to head with like the most popular EVM in the world by copying it, and I just didn't seem like you have such a really successful thing in Hex, and like the team of Ethereum and Hex, where all the value is. It didn't make sense to me to go head to head against it. And after the Bitcoin, or I'm sorry, this last bull run, and seeing how bad gas really got, and how it kind of destroys the adoption rate of Hex because of the cost to interact with the protocol. It now makes sense to me that, I mean, it's obviously made sense for a while, but it in the beginning I was kind of against it. So I've sacrificed for Pulse, and I sacrificed for Pulse X, but to me the game has always been accumulating T shares, because that's the one thing that you can't get back. Time will always siphon those away from everybody. So I guess no matter what the play is on Pulse Chain, ultimately all the value will end up back in T shares.
Right. And it's such an interesting take, and a lot of people are very adamant on, and like rightfully so, honestly, because I mean, Pulse X and Pulse are shiny and they're new, and there is potentially a lot of upside that people can see, lots to be excited about. But it's easy to forget about the T share and how quickly that's going to get unattainable for the majority of people. So let me just see here with my agenda here. I don't want to be conscious of our time here. So on that note, with Pulse Chain 2, if we could transition real quick, just to keep on schedule here, with Pulse Chain specifically, where is it here? We know that during launch, there's going to be like the AMM is going to come in, going to do stuff with the liquidity pools, but what's exactly going to happen? Like where's all liquidity coming from? How's it? It's all going to end up obviously in Pulse X, but do you know the extent of what all the dexes that are going to be pulled from? Is there any, or
So
yeah,
my take on the initial liquidity setup is, well, I mean, obviously we know that everything starts at, in terms of dollars, nothing. So there's no value on the chain, right? So I think like that's the root of this whole thing. Like everything's going to be set up at a ratio that's basically redistributed so that the whatever the multiplication of the 10,000 times the ETH equals the pulse, right? That's the
Mhm.
supply. That everything is balanced back out and it makes sense. Okay, so that everything starts out at a baseline, and that's all that matters to me is that everything's going to have a baseline.
Mhm.
And then so where the value is going to come from is understanding where you think the market is going to put the ratios after the guy hits go. And so for me, like we have to use the three core components of the ecosystem to draw a baseline from that. So layer zero is the baseline. Layer one is basically what's the market going to decide the ratios are fair at. And I
Mhm.
think we've seen this on testnet for a while, where like one pulse trades at like 3 to 4 pulse X roughly on a lot of these testnets. So that makes sense to me because 3 times as many wallets sacrificed for Pulse Hex as they did for Pulse. This was mostly due to an error in like people's visibility of what Pulsechain was early on, because it was a very small thing when the Pulsechain sacrifice was going on, and Hex was still relatively small as well. Like I think there was only about 40 or 50,000 stakers in Hex leading into what was a Pulsechain sacrifice. So that was a very small market, even though it was doing incredible multiples in terms of price performance.
Mhm.
And all of that was being done on Uniswap V2, right? And so we're actually getting the setup now on Pulse Chain. It's Uniswap V2 again. And so just like think about all the coins that do amazing price performance, they're always using Uniswap V2, which is basically there's no specified ranges. You just, when you provide liquidity on there, you're going in at whatever the market's setting the ratio is at, and it's infinite range in both directions, meaning that you're always going to be your range is always going to be active, which that sucks in some ways because it means that one of the sides of the trade you're going to get hurt on. So like if you're putting up back in the early days of Uniswap V2 and Hex before Pulse Chain was ever a thing, you were pairing up Hex against Ethereum. And so as Hex outperformed Ethereum and did literally hundreds of X's against Ethereum's price performance, you were losing all of your Ethereum. But the Hex that you had was multiplying at such a rapid rate that you were able to convert that back in and get your Ethereum back. So it was kind of like this catch 22 because the price performance was so good that your Hex was going to do better, right? And
Mhm.
you were but the way that you'd end up with if you provided LP is you'd end up with all the Ethereum and you'd miss out on the Hex, right? Because that's how it
Right.
works is you're getting the bad side of the trade. So then it's good for price performance, but it's bad for the LP provider versus V3, which we're not getting that on this new chain. We're getting V2 in the beginning, which is I think is good for price, bad for LP providers unless you know how to do it. So in my mind, we are uniquely positioned with Pulse and PulseX to pair them against each other to create this like synergistic back and forth movement where both of them are going to trend up against the dollar. And so even if the ratio changes between Pulse and PulseX, you're still going to end up in a better place at the end of the line. As long as you have a longer time horizon, you're not only earning fees, but you're also going to be earning that incentive token. And I think that's like the missing piece in this whole thing.
Mhm. And it's going to be a big thing that we're going to talk about soon. And I want to, before we get to the incentive, though, I want to talk about like how V2 liquidity on PulseX is going to affect Hex on Ethereum. If we assume that there's some sort of bonding with liquidity, between EHEX and PHEX of some sort, how could we see V2 price help, or the difference between V2 and V3 and the effects, and how they'll interact? What do you see?
Yeah, if PHEX performs tremendously well and there's a thick enough pair of wrapped EHEX tied to Hex on Pulse, then by nature of their bonded liquidity, EHEX will also rise along with it. And this is also because not only will the liquidity be pulling the prices up, but people will arbitrage that opportunity at
Mm-hmm.
some harmonistic ratio that they'll always hold some sort of like a harmony. And like if PX is going to go up 100% by nature of their bonded liquidity, EHEX it with no trading volume will still go up at a ratio relative to that. To pick figures is like probably doesn't make sense, but to
Of course.
say that they're going to rise together is common sense. And then when you figure that there is still all the value of EHEX over there, especially for big players, they're going to arbitrage the two. So
Mhm.
like the parity argument is like something we can't predict, but the fact that they'll rise and fall together is something that I would be comfortable saying.
Right. And how do you think, what are maybe the few scenarios that are, probable to think about that could create that environment where parity is reached? Like, are we expecting the ecosystem to push up to where EHEX is? Are we expecting EHEX to come? Are you thinking EHEX likely more comes down? Is it somewhere in the middle? How does that all get there in your mind?
I think just because PHEX will be so, starting at almost nothing, it'll just make a rapid ascent to closer to what EHEX price is going to be at. But you got to factor into that the EHEX price can fall after the fork, and then the
Hmm.
PHEX price can rise, right? And so then they meet somewhere in the middle. Because if it's literally just if you think of it more in terms of a stock split where the supply is getting doubled, now you have like, what is it going to be, like 1.2 billion hex across the two chains? That
Hmm.
means that the value of the coin on each chain should be half the price of what it is on EHEX now. So if we're trading
Right.
at 6 cents, then both chains should find parity at 3 cents, so to speak. That's kind of like basic, but that's just the way to think about it, is that you'll see this massive volatility zone where like people are going to be abandoning EHEX, jumping ship, going over to PHEX, or going over to across the chain to chase pumps or whatever they're going to do. So that's going to automatically bring the value down in dollar terms over here, which is going to give a smaller target to hit in terms of PHEX. But yet they both still function the same. And so I think all of that price action under 10 cents is huge opportunity. So I look at all of it as a positive, really, because whales are looking to absorb. There's literal big players in the Hex ecosystem right now. Surprised there's no one in the chat right now that really is trying to flood the price of EHEX down because they're looking to buy it. Because, for example, on in February of this year, a whale on ETH went and bought 1,000 ETH market buy and then staked it till May 6th. Did it again at 8 cents a few weeks ago, staked it till the same day, and then ended the stakes and just pulled out like 35 grand of hex yield. And they paid only a $260 gas fee. So if you're one of those like 6-figure, 7-figure bag holders of hex, like you still there's a reason why there's still hex community events and everyone's always happy and shit, is because they're fucking earning crazy yield. Even at 5 cents, if the price stayed flat here forever, there's an opportunity, which is why I think it's only a matter of time till you start building floors slowly over the next 2 to 3 years on both chains, and you basically make this huge wave up with the new adoption going to come in with Pulsechain Launch and all the new eyes and trading and all the dead bodies that'll be behind us in terms of all the different coins that gets traded, but all the value will get stuck in there somewhere because you can never extract it all out. Once the people have been through the door, they always leave something behind. So
Hmm.
it's just really going to be a good setup for new adoption of Hex on either chain, really.
Yeah, and you made a comment too that I want to go back to real quick. You talked about Hex is going to start very low and run up. So this is an interesting conversation because I've been trying so hard to understand, where the starting point in terms of all of these prices. Because, and totally correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding so far is that there's going to be liquidity pools get copied over. Those liquidity pools are going to have ratios that the fixer bot's going to go in and is going to move either side by 10,095 fold to get 1.2 million X difference in ratio. And then we're going to have those same ratios as a relative starting point when the bridge is closed initially. Now, those are going to move a bit, but we're going to have like a relative ratio starting point across all liquidity pools. So are you saying that that point is going to get started quite low initially when the bridge opens? Or is just you think the price of Hex will just on Pulse Chain start just low due to moving of ratios?
No, I don't necessarily think it's because of the ratios. I think we have to go on like basically what was this. I think we have to base it off of what the sack rate was, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what is the sack rate for a pulse? I think it's like what, four zeros and a one, roughly. Or
Was
I
that with
could
the
be wrong.
multiplier?
Without the multiplier, just base, wasn't it like four zeros and a one? I don't know.
Three
I'm
zeros
not
and a one, I'm pretty sure.
three zeros and a one. Okay,
Yeah.
so then to get the actual, you could actually you could calculate, and you might know this number, that you can calculate out based on that price for a pulse what the ratio would be fair value, because all you do is you'd multiply the ratios of what's sitting in the hex versus ETH pools at the moment of the fork, right? So you could actually know this for yourself. I don't want to give away too much, and that's for you guys to decide. But I guess ultimately going into this, I think that the EHEX price can dump leading into mainnet or around mainnet. But slightly before, it's already down a ton. Let me see, 5.7. It's trying to hold these levels, but it's not looking good. Like, we got that nice pump yesterday. So I guess what I'm saying, bottom line, is that this plays like Big Payday. It's an event where smart money is going to come in and scoop a massively discounted hex on both chains. And I don't know, I'm curious to ask you, like, what do you think that we start above or below base SAC prices?
That's like the billion. I'll even say it's like the $1 billion question. I'm still not completely sure what to think. I really don't know what's best in terms of outcome. What would make the most sense? Because I keep trying to think, okay, what would Richard do, or what would his team do in terms of setting that ratio, or setting the prices to make sure that things work out best. And I think that, if you're trying to make it so that way the people who sacrificed feel like they are happy, and I don't know if you want to do that or anything like that, but maybe you start it a little bit above. But then it's like you have 2 years of people talking about where's Pulsechain, where's Pulsechain, where's Pulsechain. At this point, we know there's a lot of people that want out. And so if you start it above, you incentivize the opportunity to sell. But if you sell below, you incentivize people getting a better deal than the people that got into SAC price. So, I mean, maybe if I were to guess, I would say somewhere just above SAC, somewhere where people aren't incentivized to sell, but they're not incentivized. And the people that can get in when the bridge opens don't get a better rate than the day 1 or through 10 sacrificers. It would be my best guess, but I really don't know. Like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot, like, you said, you made a comment of, like, to not incentivize them to sell by setting it slightly higher than SAC rate. But I'm looking at it more in terms of there's forced sellers who are already waiting. They need to sell because they're over leveraged. Maybe they took a loan out or something, and they need to sell like ASAP to satisfy their loans, that or whatever's going on in their life. Things happen. And so, if you're a buyer, do you want to buy something at full price, or do you want a discount? You know what I mean? Like, people want discounts, and unless the demand is there, and there's that, like, FOMO feeling of, like, oh shit, the price is going up, and that forces people to get scared into buying. If that's not present from the launch, then yeah, you're going to have the automatic sellers at any price, and then you're going to have buyers that want a better deal that will let it fall 80 and 90%. And then it just really depends on how much demand there is coming in. And I think that start of the chart can be very up and down around the SAC price. Could be anywhere of a 10x up and a 10x and a 90% down very quickly because of how illiquid it'll be. But that ultimately, there's a ton of demand that's going to come in because there's people talking about Pulsechain now that have been hiding hex from people for years and just talking down on it. So the narrative is going to change, and it's going to bring in a bunch of new money relatively quickly. And I think that first 90 days, although volatile, would end up being very profitable, just because it's just like with what happened with Pepe. It's something new, and if it has a good start, it can really have legs. But the difference with that is that Pepe launched and most of its liquidity was put into a Uni V2 pair, and the admin keys was thrown away. So all it could do was pump because no one had any supply. And so, like, it's different here where, like, it's Uni V2, but people sacrifice, and there are forced sellers, and people do need to sell. So it's a little bit different. But I think after you get that first initial volatile period, whether that be 48 hours, 72 hours, or a week, or however long it's going to be, you can get, just like in the early days of Hex, you can get a huge spike down and then a rally out within 30 days. And then that first 90 days ends up looking pretty damn good.
I think you raise a good point though on the the FOMO and that need for that price to be going up to create that hype and that drive. I think that's a really good point. And I wouldn't be surprised if that is how it works out initially. Like there's a big massive run up, and I think it's probable that PLSX to a degree goes the opposite direction, obviously because there's a lot of people. I don't know how big of the wallets or how many of the larger wallets are going to be playing the game of trying to get a PLSX to go into PLS. And I remember seeing the ratio on testnet v4 when it went live. PLS to PLSX was 1.06 pulse to 1, or 1.06 pulse X to 1 pulse. I think it was the starting ratio set by the AMM.
Mm-hmm. I heard the
So,
same.
Yeah, so to me, it's like that signals that all right, pulse X is going to drop, and because I think that a lot of people,
you think it's going to want to go back closer to 3 to 1, right?
Pulse I think
X to pulse.
Somewhere around that, around there. I think it could float between 2 to 4 to 1, where it settles.
Sure.
Somewhere in there. But I think just because of that, like if it's going to settle at 4 to 1 and everyone is expecting that, then I personally would believe that, okay, we're going to dump past that and correct back up eventually, because everyone's going to be trying to do that has that kind of mindset. So it'll go past, and that's an opportunity, and then it would come back up and eventually settle once the volatility kind of chills out.
Mm-hmm. So the opportunity there for those listening, not everyone's going to be able to capture this, but if you see the pulse X to pulse ratio get to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 1, then you're going to want to take that chance to get a huge deal on pulse X. And you don't have to do your whole pulse bag, but a percentage. And then when it comes to PHEX, I would be very, very concerned if you thought you were going to try to do any kind of ratio trading with your PHEX bag, because in my mind, Hex has the most opportunity in this bull cycle, even over 1000x in pulse and 1000x potential 600 to 1000x in pulse X, like plus even higher on pulse potentially. I still think from the bottom in this EHEX price, we can go with 10,000x, not maybe within 1 to 2 cycles. I think Hex can do another 10,000x.
And why do you think that? Because I know a lot of people are, you hear a lot of people talk about, okay, well, it's cycle 2 for Hex, right? So usually cycle 1 performs the best. I know Hex is a different beast, but why do you believe that Hex is going to do another 10,000x in the next
I don't
1
know
to 2
that
cycles?
for 100% that it's going to do that, but I think that it's definitely very possible, like that I would, because there's the yield mechanic there. There's no extra work required for you to earn yield. And this world is starved for yield. And if people in the regular, like, look, banks are failing all around us. The dollars, your purchasing power is getting destroyed every day. What are you going to do? Hold a lump of gold in your safe? Like, no, you're going to look for, no middlemen, no counterparty risk yield somewhere. And we already know that the law of cryptocurrency is that when green candles form, other green candles form. People chase green candles. And once, Hex gets to $1, which isn't 1,000x, that's only what is that, like a 12, 13, 14x away, like easily attainable for Hex after doing a 10,000x, right? We've already been halfway there before. Once it gets there, that's when people are going to get it. And so it's all those new people coming in to buy $1 million of Hex, like at $1, that have expendable money, that now that it's an established, legitimate option for yield, that it'll push then the price even higher, $10, $20 potentially this cycle or next. And then that floor that we come back down after the next 95% correction is sitting on 70 cents to $1. And at that level, there's meaningful yield there inside of this immutable contract for everybody, right? Because at these prices, it's really just a game for the first 1,000 guys that have the biggest bags right now. But at $1, all of a sudden you open the doors up for 10,000 people. And that's a lot more people saying good things about it, and that have their lives been changed by this thing. And again, you can't underestimate the power of when something's parity with $1, because that's just people's mental spaces based around the cost of $1, right? Like most people don't go much farther than that. They know how much like a 24 pack of beer costs, or they know how much like McDonald's costs, or they know how much a gas tank to fill up their gas tank costs. And that's all based in dollars, not fractions of pennies, right? So it's like, once the game can be understood by the masses, it will be adopted by the masses. And now you have a chain and pulse chain where it's affordable to transact. And that's not even accounting for the fact that you can get all of this new money to flood into pulse chain. And by consequence, Hex can benefit in price performance, because we're the ones holding all the pulse Hex and Hex anyways. Hexicans sacrifice the most for all these things. So we get that already. So all we need is the new money to come into the ecosystem, and then it just turns into this self-reinforcing loop. You add other elements like Hedron and Icosa into the mix, and it just creates even more opportunity for the crypto elite.
I think it's a perfect way to transition. Well, one thing I want to add, because I'd love to transition to Hedron and Icosa on that note, but one thing that's important that I keep thinking about too is, well, if we're going to have two hexes, we're going to have E hex and we're going to have P hex, or Pulsechain hex and Ethereum hex. If you're comparing Pulse X and Pulse Chain to E hex and P hex, and you've received the copy, you don't need to necessarily perform the same as Pulse and Pulse X in order to match their gains with both of the E hex and the P hex combined. So this is something that I think is really interesting, and what I've seen a lot of people discount is the fact that you're getting a copy of something that could not only keep up with Pulse and Pulse X, but possibly even overperform, and you just got a free copy of it. And so, yes, maybe Pulse and Pulse X individually outperforms either Pulse Chain Hex or Ethereum Hex. But as soon as you get half the gains on both of those two combined of whatever Pulse and Pulse X does, you're breaking even with the gains. And as soon as it creeps over that 50% mark of what you've achieved in the Pulse and Pulse X price, now you're actually winning in comparison to both of them, just like that. So I think that's a really important point. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
And I haven't thought about that before in that way, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's just good to hear. It's refreshing because you're right. What you just said is it validated my point that all the hexes have to do combined is 5,000x on each chain, and you've effectively got a 10,000x.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's like, it's so much more achievable when you put it like that.
You're not got sick, but hex is the universal conduit of store of value between the two massive new the new EVM chain and the old one, where all the monetary energy is. The unifying the conduit of all that workspace is the hex token, right? So if the liquids bind big enough together, yeah, you can get this dynamic where value will flow from wrapped versions of the token across the bridge, right?
And now you have
That's
also
what I
with the
effectively see. It's like it's arbitrage and T-share rate.
Yep, exactly. And like you mentioned too, there's even going to be the arbitrage, opportunity between the two hexes, and that's going to hopefully glue them together even more. And then when it comes to the T-share, I mean, we could go on the T-share rate a little bit in terms of like what they'll do in like how they'll perform differently in the chain. But I think what I'm more curious about right now too is what you see in Hedron and Icosa, and what they add, because obviously there's so much to speak about in terms of Hex and T-share and just how valuable that's going to be. And then you amplify how difficult getting Hex daily is going to be and getting T-shares. But what does Hedron and Icosa bring, or what does it fill in, or what does it bring to the table in terms of the T-share and Hex for you?
It adds value. It gets more hex locked up. In terms of utility, it locks up more hex, so that helps everybody. In terms of usability or opportunity, it gives an opportunity for guys that could never get a large bag of T-shares. They can be getting the T-shares for like anywhere from 60 to 85% off, which we've seen now. Through the most recent big waves of HSI auctions, people have been getting like 50 T-shares, which is like roughly 80 grand as of a couple weeks ago. They've been getting $80,000 bags of T-shares for like $5,000 or less, even in some cases. And so it tells me that there's this huge mismatch in the market where like the market doesn't know how to value hex, especially on that longer time frame. So in the legacy markets, what this is called is an inverted yield curve, where the market values hex today at what the price is today, but it doesn't value locked up hex that's farther out in time. And then in the bond world, it's like, a 30-year bond is like worth less than or is yielding less than 6-month bond, for example. So it's like it's showing a lack of faith in the U.S. government, that people aren't willing to buy long-term commitments in bonds. But at the same time, it's showing a lack of faith long-term in hex, because people are not willing to pay full price for T-shares because Hedron's so undervalued. What this ultimately is super huge opportunity for people to capture a 2-cycle wave, right? This is the man who's willing to stand here, or the woman that's willing to stand here and take a chance on not playing one bull cycle, but 2 cycles ahead, is going to be able to capture so much value, and then you got to figure the duplicate of it on the new chain. So it's the ultimate trade. You're getting these things at 99% off when you factor all that.
That's cool to think about. That's so true. The longer term you can think about it, I mean, and like even now, look at these, like 75% off 5,000 hex. You got 70% off 35,000. There was like 190,000 hex here for 68% off. So what is that if in terms of discounts here? That's like for 6 cents, 2/3 off. It's like 3 cents, just under, right around 3 cents, 3 cent hex.
Yeah, and like I said, there was guys in my group that were getting like 1.07 cent hex because they were 86% off, and this was a couple weeks ago in that big wave of auction. So there's opportunity. It's not just a whales game, because people aren't really bidding on like the 10,000 or 20,000 hex stakes. They're only bidding on like the really big ones, because that's more of like a whales game. So I think people have become discouraged because they're looking at the dollar value, and it's not a good mindset. Now I will add that with the rising gas fees, it's made it very hard to do this, because like, are you really gonna put in like the same? I mean, just to start an auction the other day, and this was at like, I think, I want to say it was like 60 Gwei to start an auction. It was like $35. Do you really want to pay 35 bucks to maybe lose an auction? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So it's really though, but if you're figuring that all this really is the cost of doing business, and you have a good strategy, and you do plan on, bidding a nice sweet spot and potentially winning it, then yeah, there's tons of opportunity in here.
And how do you see the difference between Ethereum and Pulsechain when it comes to these auctions? Do you see them being treated differently?
I mean, and this might be exactly where you're going with this, which is that on Pulsechain, the auctions are going to take off because the cost of doing business is like literally zero, basically. And so I think people are going to mass accumulate the HSIs on the new chain. And that might mean that the Hedron price performs better over there, which then in turn you could wrap and bridge over your Hedron from Ethereum potentially and create liquidity pool. There's like so many different opportunities that I'm thinking that are a possibility, but you really need the market to show its hand. So a lot of people need to do it in unison. We'll see, who starts absorbing all those HSIs first.
It's going to be super interesting to see, because I do think that, Pulsechain initially at least is going to probably get a little more traction in the realms of moving the prices closer to their ceilings. But at the same time, with things like Rocket Pool coming for Pulsechain, possibly, with having a place to stake your pulse to earn more pulse and yield, but also having Icosa as the insurance token, and possibly, who knows, maybe something comes down the road for Hedron. Obviously, you're not counting on that. That's just like completely left field speculation. But, even with the idea of something like that coming for Icosa, that could shift things massively around. But short of that, what do you think it's going to take for, like, what parameters, what's the word? What environment has to happen for Hedron and Icosa to start to see their prices move closer and close the gap on the ceiling prices?
That's a good question. My personal opinion, and this is just an opinion, it could be worth hogwash, but I think we need to see Hex go parabolic. I think we need Hex to really take a stand and head up and try to break that all-time high. And then the amount of vertical candles you're going to see on Hedron and Icosa is just going to blow your mind, because they'll become, even at a greater discount. But eventually that discount gets so juicy that people can come in and absorb tons of the supply. Now, I'll remind you, for today, if you stake like $200,000 a hex for 15 years and you lock it up in a HSI, that is the only way for you to be able to get a billion Hedron the traditional route. So how many people in the future, let's say, are going to stake $200,000 and lock it up for 15 years just for a billion Hedron, when you can go to the market right now and buy a billion Hedron for like, what is it, like $3,000, $4,000, something like that?
Yeah, a couple billion for $4,000, I think it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing, like, you need to take advantage of the hyperinflation that we're getting right now on those 10x minting bonuses, because like the guys that are getting rid of the coin and suppressing price by, they're there's inherent value there for the guys that have the huge bonuses. But once they're out, the inherent value then gets switched over to the market, because now it's a mad dash to scoop up all those coins. And then if you think about, thinking of Hedron in terms of a longer term play, like what you need to see happen is a lot of these guys that like to dump Hedron to affect price short term. You want those guys that are short term thinkers to start EESing their stakes in the bull run and killing off their 10x minting bonuses. And if the dollar sign is good enough, it will incentivize them to EES their stakes. And then a lot of that future inflation is just going to evaporate and never come into existence, which is going to help the price of Hedron eclipse and come closer to its ceiling price.
I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, I agree, especially with your talk about, Hex needing to go parabolic. I've been talking about that for a while, where it's like when you get to these stakes up here where 1,200 and something, 260 hex, 622 hex, 343 hex. Well, I think when you get to a place where those stakes have some sort of meaningful value, in terms of their principal plus their yield, I think, yeah, that's when we start to see that gap close. And unfortunately, maybe it takes till 2025, 2026 to see the hex price go up high enough where that hits. It is what it is. But I agree completely. I think short of that, it is going to be kind of difficult, with the amount of inflation that's out there, because it is a distribution phase, but it is what it is. But I think you're right. I think it does need that. And if we see Rocket Pool come on, what are your thoughts on the Rocket Pool?
I think it's a positive, just to finish that thought up. Yeah. I think it's a very positive thing that you're getting this much people that have so and so forth lost faith in Hedron. Because if it was a faith-based investment, then you're not investing properly. It shouldn't be faith-based. You should be knowing how this is from a technical level, and that the hyperinflation phase does end, and that hex does go to $1 on either chain. And so then in those environments that are going to happen, that are mathematically programmed to happen, like this stuff goes up by a lot, and it's just who can outlast everybody else, really, and take advantage of these dips.
That's so true. The forward you need to be forward thinking with these kind of systems. If you're thinking short term, you're never gonna understand what it's even doing, really, and the purpose of it, nor you're gonna understand the macro side and how it will play out and how it's supposed to effectively improve or interlock with Hex.
Because everybody's got to play catch up. Like if Hex is now $1, now everyone that wasn't staking 2 years ago from today, and then 2 years from now it'll be 4 years backwards, wasn't forward thinking. They're playing catch up to try to get that yield that now has been made out of reach for them in a lot of ways. Like, and everything's a relative. It's a competitive environment where, everything's based on whatever like minimum wage would be, so to speak. Like if what's your average crypto investor going to have? Let's just say your average, let's just say like a good number, like people are making $80,000 a year or something. How much of that can you allocate? Like, let's say somebody's like has a really good risk appetite and can put in 20,000 of the 80,000 or something. And then you multiply that by like 10,000 users or 100,000 users. That's what's going to be coming in at $1 to chase and try to make up for lost time. But, so it'll help the price, it's just a good way to think about it is like, when the time has come, you can no longer get thousands and thousands or millions of these things for relatively cheap price relative to what the economy is valuing, like minimum wage at, so to speak.
And I think also too is like as price starts to go up, by the time it gets to a point where maybe it's $1, the T-share rate's going to be well over 30,000 by then. And at that point, if Hex is $1, that's 30,000 Hex. That's $30,000 for a single T-share, right? So the actual difficulty of getting yield goes up exponentially, and these longer term stakes start to become even more meaningful too, as well, because as the pool shrinks, because the difficulty is going up exponentially of getting into these pools. Do people see the yield climbing to 7, 8, 9, 10 Hex per T-share? The systems are going to interlock, and it's going to force it up ultimately, at least in my opinion.
It's going to be a huge rubber banding effect. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
You're not going to be able to do it forever. Like eventually that thing's going to build up a critical mass and just go flying high.
100%.
And, we have recency bias now because we're PTSD'd from from 600 days, 700 days of bear market. So it's like it's easy to think that P shares are just going to be like this forever and that you'll always have a chance to get more. But there will come a time when, again, people are going to be playing catch up, and you don't want to be that person. So you want to be, I think the most optionality leading into the mainnet is to have a liquid bag, but you should also have already been set a laddered out system for yourself like years ago. You know what I mean? Because the guys that are going to win the hardest through this entire volatility phase of mainnet are the guys that had already went and put stakes in a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, out laddered out for 15 years. Like those guys are still winning the hardest out of anybody. Like I know there's many of us that have almost like doubled their bag, like half their bag is interest now by this point. It's just amazing. Like, and there's going to be people that aren't going to figure this out now for another 2 years. And then they're going to be the ones buying your bags at $1 because they're going to have to catch up for that yield that is getting siphoned away. And like, if you factor in like any kind of regulatory or like federal mandate, like they're like, oh, you can't withdraw X amount out of your bank account anymore. And if you don't think that's a possibility, it's already happened in the history of the United States where they said you can't, like they called it a bank holiday and you couldn't even take your money out for a week. It's like, if that happens again, think about what kind of extent that has on the crypto market. Like as soon as the banks open back up, you're just going to have more and more of waves and waves of people coming into crypto for yield. And then this is probably like the premier asset, right?
100%. And think about when the CBDCs actually come online, when it's literally just the click of a button. They don't need an approval. There's nothing that needs to happen except for just like, nope, we don't like what you did online. We don't like what you have gone too far on your carbon footprint, or you've done too much of one thing. You can't spend this money now, or you've done something we don't like. As soon as that happens, well, I think everything you said, and that's at least in my opinion, that's coming far more quickly than what the general consensus about it is. From those who maybe know about it but don't really understand it, like it's down the road. It's like
complacency.
We're right there, man.
We've lived. If you're my age, in your 30s, or if you're in your 40s, even you've had a cushy life your whole life here in the U.S. Like you've been able to be. You never had to think about how hard life is in other countries throughout the world because it's been perfectly fine for you, and that's because your government does its best to put us in a position of power at all costs for their own benefit. And you've just been closer to the tit than everyone else. And so, but once the tit gets pulled, what are you going to do? You better have a plan of action. This is what Wales Only likes to talk about. And he's not alone. There's a lot of people ringing the bells right now, sounding the alarms. And so make sure that a percentage of your stuff is in, self-custodied cryptocurrency, preferably one that provides yield. And preferably you're already 2 years ahead on it and you have a staking ladder, right?
Yep. Exactly. Man, I wish we had like 2-3 hours to go off here because I feel like there's so much we could talk about and I want to keep riffing on this, but I also wanted to ask you because you've spent so much time obviously talking about crypto and Hex and gone on like liquidity providing, and you provided so much to the community in that sense. But you've also made these amazing streams. What is it called again? It was Radial. Thank you. Yeah, those two. I remember watching them and just being like, dude, like this is so sick to see this out and to be broken down in a systematic and logical way, but still like kind of going into the realms of like the irrational that is so hard to put down on paper. So how did you fall to the perspective that you have and into finding all of this in terms of talking about consciousness and energy and all of that? What led you to that?
So remember I was telling you, like back in when I was only 18 years old, I was made aware of like the fractional reserve banking system through a documentary called Zeitgeist, for anybody who's familiar with it. And that documentary did a good job of
Great.
like making a nice bow around the fact that the financial system was broken, but that it was going to take a spiritual movement to change the entire system from the ground up. And so that began what was like a 15+ year journey now of seeking enlightenment in the self and like just trying to understand philosophically all the great questions of life. And I think that it's just convenient that cryptocurrency is an element of the mathematical substrate of the highest layer of human society that can give us the power back to the sovereigns in a way that's fair and immutable to let us harness our deepest spiritual desires. And without it, you'd be still in a broken world with a broken system. So I think this really just allows for enlightenment, and it's like they are coming at the perfect time to help us break out of a system that doesn't work for us anymore. And in terms of like radial, energy, money, time, these are all elements of hex, which is, key to this, but also they're elements to Bitcoin and Ethereum and others. Um, you know, there's a lot in there, right, that we can unpack, in terms of like what language is or what mathematics is, but it's all one unified field. It's all one holistic whole system governed by the laws of creation, right? And so that's the one thing that binds us and gives us an equal footing to stand on, where we can all have this shared consciousness or this shared reality. But it ultimately is up to us to decide what that reality looks like. And so that changes over time. And right now it's changing in a drastic way and away from, nation states, centralized authority, and back into like a decentralized, more open, free and fair society, hopefully. But with that comes like all of the people need to come back to a sense of like self authority, or what's a better way to put it? They need to have they need to have a sense of responsibility, because with as with great power comes great responsibility. And there's always going to be things that are going to cause hangups. For example, and one thing that just comes to mind is like these crypto billionaires that went missing or died in the last couple of years. There's control structures that does not want this stuff to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, and whether for better or for worse. And so like you need to be, as these bull runs continue to play out, I encourage everyone to stay, level-headed, head on a swivel, and protect yourself through legally and physically and all the other means. And but at the end of the line, trust your intuition and follow your gut. And if you follow your gut and you're wrong the first time, but you follow it the next time, you're going to have a better trigger on whether or not you're going to get more tuned in to what the right salute. Like as long as you always go with your intuition, you'll refine that process and you'll be able to take control of what is the executive function of your mind, and allow you to really gain some sense of supernatural or superpowers on the world, and be able to just execute your desire or your will on the world and be more effective. And this comes with the gathering of the new resource in this digital age, which is like amassing crypto resources, so to speak, to give you that influence and power over your environment.
Mm-hmm. Damn, dude, that's very well said. I love the part about trusting your gut too, and I think it really, you nailed it. And this is like an opportunity. This whole thing, as much as things are coming at us and things are changing rapidly, and there are actors that are trying to grab control and basically clamp you down. This is also, as much as it's the obstacle, it's also the opportunity, like you said, to gain responsibility and gain power. And with great power comes great responsibility, and great responsibility comes great power. And it's a positive feedback loop, and so by taking the time to learn about, like you said, your intuition, and follow your gut and understand what that means, what that feeling really is, I think that this is the time for that, and to understand what that is. And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you do any practices? Do you do anything that allows you to be in tune to know what's coming through the wisdom of the body and the intuition, versus just noise of the mind that is loud enough to make you feel as though it's an intuitive thought? Like, how do you discern that? Or do you do anything to stay clear enough to listen to your intuition?
Mm-hmm. So, obviously there's the whole, meditate stuff, but I actually don't prescribe to that myself, and that's not a valid practice, and one that should be used by many. Or like just physical activity and exercise is another one. Like all that stuff is going to compound your returns in terms of spiritual awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But for myself, I just stay in like an emotionless state. Like I generally just always stay at like a happy medium, and then I'm more in alignment, because like I don't get overly excited, or I don't get like overly depressed about things. I just stay flatline kind of. But then in that, there's so much clarity, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you can absorb all this information in the information age coming at you from a neutral stance, which gives you a really good beat on the nuggets. You're basically a treasure gatherer, and you're out there in the internet, you're searching, or you're out there in the world, and you're just gathering golden nuggets as they're presented to you. And when you really do this effectively, you're perfectly in sync with your place in the divine realm of all that is, right? Because
Mhm.
you're being fed the right information at the right times at the right pace, and then you can fulfill your highest goals, I guess. Your highest responsibility, right? You can fulfill it by being present, by having a neutral stance, by not getting emotionally charged at things, following your intuition, honing that all in, and becoming some super conscious, like receptive biopsychic battery that can just project out the highest truth that you see in the world. And then when you do that, you evaporate, eviscerate, and eliminate all of that which is not serving you in your highest bet. And then those around you see that, and then they are reflected back to them truths of their own from their own perspectives. And it acts like a light shining in the darkness, and it just activates people one by one across the globe. And that's why I love doing this so much, is I get to come on here and speak my truth and affect people and awaken people to the reality that's here, which is we live in a quantum holographic reality, and your thoughts are literally your thoughts, your feelings are creating the external reality, and that you can take that infinitely far. The deeper you find, the more curious it gets, because it more mystery, more miracles, more unknown, and it's just like an environment where you're at the edges of all that is, and life is manifesting right on the edge of your finger. And it's like I can't explain it other than something like what Crypto Berries is saying, is it's like interdimensional existence. Like you're no longer just in 3 dimensions anymore, because your consciousness is expanding out way beyond.
Mhm. I could not agree more with that. Like, the old saying, as above, so below, it goes so deep. Like, life reflects back to you your current state and your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings. And it's crazy what happens when you start to change your internal state. Like, as you were saying, I've had I have a very wide spectrum personally. Like, I can be completely calm, but then I also um, have been given I'll call it the both blessing and curse of being able to widely experience like massively volatile emotional states, and learning how to open that up and clear the old stuff that's been through the body and old belief systems in the subconscious. It's like life starts to shift little by little. You can start seeing things change, like the trajectory of, or the type of people coming in and out of life, the opportunities coming in and out, or your ability to see opportunities. Or at least for myself, I've noticed that change, and so the more you take that seriously and the more you begin to understand that it's life's a mirror and you're a mirror also for the external reality, it's a two-way mirror. You can play with that and you can find out what works best for you, because everyone's going to have a different way. Even from what I've seen, everybody experiences maneuvering and working with that differently. Like for me, the practices that I do, I bet you almost nobody that is in this chat is going to resonate with the way that I do things, because it wouldn't work. Everyone's got a different system and everyone has different needs. But I wanted to ask you as well,
I
on
think that's
that
amazing,
note.
man. I think that's like super important that you brought up. Like everybody's going to start as a blank slate. And as your child, there's impressions that's going to get put on you. And that's not who you are. But you need to
Mhm.
seek the inner light, and you need to just trust that there is a higher place, and you just need to be moving toward it, and everything else will sort itself out.
Could not agree with that more. You're given a pile of rocks that slowly accumulated over birth, and you've mistaken the pile of rocks for you. But slowly, as you remove the rocks, you can remember that, oh yeah, I have an arm. That's my arm, right? The rock's not my arm. And then you realize you have two. And slowly you realize that what's going on up here is all, like you said, programs. So, dude, I love where your head's at. I love it. It's so refreshing every time. And it's happening more and more, which is cool. It's not a one-off experience anymore. And it's so cool to
Yeah,
see
if you
that. And I
want,
wanted
I'll
to
as you're asking this next question, I'll pull up a graph that kind of shows this like evolution of the consciousness of all of us as over time
let's
from
go.
radio.
That's perfect. Let's do it. And I wanted to ask you though, because you mentioned like opening yourself up to like your divine goals and your purpose and your or for what you want, because it's ultimately, well, at least what I believe, like you're here to do what you ultimately want is like the self, not like you in terms of like the based on the beliefs and the perspective that you want, but based on your true self and the goals that you have underneath all of the limiting beliefs that don't filter that. Like, what are your goals and what are you feel you're called to do and to bring into this world?
Pretty big question. The simplest thing I can do is activate others and make them
Mhm.
aware. I command them to resonate with what's resonating with them and to open themselves up to not give away all their biases, not become a subject of somebody else's, but to take hold of their own power. Like, and if I can just make them more aware, I feel like that'll all sort itself out. So that's like the super base level of it. But then beyond that, obviously want the species to go interstellar. Maybe that's not so obvious. I've spoken on it before, but I want us to. It's a call to action for everybody to awaken to their divine rights and just become the best version of themselves. And it doesn't have to be in a one day. It could take a lifetime. It's okay. Everyone will evolve at their own right, perfectly right on time, right? But
Mhm.
I want to share the best, most upbringing technologies, like whether that be, and I want to share the best information to make the market smarter, and so that we can effectively use our resources in a better way. So all of these things combined, more of an abstract perspective on why I'm here, but in a literal sense, like I would like to literally be working on, interstellar phenomenon, whether it be like on the cutting edge of our human contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, or whether it be a deep dive into the newest and greatest technologies that are being hidden from us, or that are, right outside of our reach, that we're just about to get in the next 50 years. Anything that really pushes the world forward in a big way. Like I've been interested in computing since I was like 8 or 10 years old, and that was like the very beginning of my jump into this consciousness evolution. Another way of looking at it would be, what do we have? In order to know more about our reality, we had to invent creations outside of ourselves. In terms of like, to know more about the microscopic, we had to create the microscope. But it was an idea long before it was a creation of our own. And so what we're doing is we're transducing big ideas down through the working of the human body and mind into our reality, to then understand the external reality from an outside world view of something that was already internally inherent in us, our curiosity to know what was in the smallest level of reality. So it's something that you know internally as a species already, or a reversed version of that is the creation of the telescope to look farther out into space. But we're only using those external tools of our own creation to verify or validate our internal curiosities, anyways. And so it's
Mhm.
really all within, anyhow. It's just a matter of what perspective you want to take on all of this. But yeah, so that's kind of my quick and dirty on it. Why I'm here is to remind everybody of this information and to continue my own growth, my own spiritual growth into the end of my days.
And I think you're doing an amazing job of that too. Like the amount of I because you're empowering so many people through like the knowledge that you're bringing and through the expertise and the amount of hours that you spend on YouTube combining both crypto and also throwing spirituality deep into it as well and really tying them together, not in a way that's just like, you know, someone making false claim, making claims about things, or just loosely tying them verbally together. But you're literally bringing data. You're literally bringing the logical into the illogical and tying them together to show how they're intertwined, how they intersect, and how they're inseparable.
Uh,
And I think that we're so lucky to have so many people like you, but you specifically in the ecosystem as well, and in this community and out here, just providing value to people to like awaken them. I think that's so special, man, and I commend you for it. It's amazing. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that there's someone, so kind and receptive as yourself to see that and appreciate that, because it's really a reflection of your own character, right? So it's mutual, and I appreciate it. And
Right
so
back. I appreciate that too.
with that, let's talk about the technology and the technosphere. So where do I get all this crazy ideas from? Well, I want to reframe your worldview on like, what do you think about just the Earth itself? So like relative size of the world here. So this is you can see that there's this like parabolic chart on the bottom. But what it's really representing is this middle box here where it says relative size of the world based on the reduction in transportation time. So all this is based around humans' understanding of time, where we stop living in a place of space-based mindset and we start living in a time-based mindset. Doesn't that sound familiar when we're living in a world where there's cryptocurrency that monetizes time itself? So check this out. Back in the days like of 1000 BC, this is going back like 1000+ years, the average human could only travel at a speed of 15 kilometers per hour, which was the average speed of a sailing ship, right? But then you fast forward like 800 years, and then all of a sudden we invented the steam locomotive ships and automobiles, which now could by a factor of like 6 or 7x more, you could go 100 kilometers per hour, which shrunk the size of the Earth down from being this big down to being this big, metaphorically speaking, or just as an example. And then all of a sudden we went from being able to only go 100 kilometers per hour to going 500 to 600 kilometers per hour. Now all of a sudden we have like invented propeller airplanes in the year 1950, which shrinks the world once again, and again in 1960 with jet planes, and again in 1980 with supersonic transport. But it wasn't until the invention of the internet that we were able to transport at the speed of thought itself and electricity, which was the internet and the information age. And this is where once you go into this like infinite, the world is infinitely small now in terms of information that can be traded across the globe, versus like back in the speed of sailing ships when all we had was snail mail. It's just completely changed the dynamic of the world, and the consciousness can now evolve at a rapid rate, which is what causes this exponential increase in human consciousness over time. Because our technology, as we externalize it, it gives us more power over our domain, and our domain is the earth, and it gives us an accelerated growth toward something, and that something is like the singularity or the end of history, so to speak, where we stop living in a place where time no longer has control over us because we have mastered time itself.
That's a really interesting thought, and I think I would even venture to say, there's equal polarity here. We're talking here about the positive side of things too, and I don't really want to bring the negative into it, but I think it's important to talk about, how having this infinitely close point where all things are accessible, where the distance between anything else doesn't really exist in terms of being able to access it and interact with it for the most part. There's the opposite side too, where you have the ability to have people get information that awakens them and empowers them and opens them up to the possibilities and the fruits of life and themselves, but then you equally have, because of this infinite potential for information, the equal and opposite polarity, where you have people that don't know how to use it properly or get lost in it and equally get consumed by wrong information and by narratives and propaganda, and they get just as equally lost into the infinite side of things as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean you're gonna have both elements at play, as with all, the world spins on an axis, and half the world is dark while the other half is light, but the dark side always comes around full circle back to the light. So that's the thing to remember, is that yes, there's always going to be darkness in the world, but the human overmind, so to speak, or the social construct that binds us all together, is always self-refining on a global scale, so that that which is not true gets separated like the wheat from the chaff. And then, because at some level there's always going to be an expert in a field that represents the penultimate of that industry or that field, and then those guys end up becoming the authority consciousness of that particular subsect of the species. And so what you're really creating is like this universal library of information where all truths can be held in their relative time frame. And so it's a positive, because it's giving us a trajectory, right? And so that at least we have the option to go and do what's best, because this is all happening at such a rapid rate. I think it kind of acts as like a what's the word? It's like the good comes with the bad, but like the bad falls away. It's called like natural fall off, or like, for example, all these cryptocurrencies get launched, but only the good ones last, right? Because the value is going to go to where it's treated best. Same thing with information. Like narratives will come and go, but only the ones that are really meaningful are going to last for an eternity, right? So, I just think that it's a big conversation piece. There's the good and the bad with it, as there's more access to information for the good. There's also for the bad, but the bad will fall away. It's just part of the process of waking up. I don't think that I don't think the 10% of evil in the world is going to override like the 50% plus of good, and then the 40% in between. That's the question mark, right? So we have to let everyone have their free will, and we'll see how we all end up. I'm bullish on humanity. I think that we have upside from here because
I
the
love that.
technology keeps getting better and more. It reinforces good behavior. Look at the invention of Hex. It really it really um, empowers people that have are that and dump their positions. They no longer have the side in this reality. So I think time will do its part.
On my end, you definitely broke up, so I didn't get that. I know the chat got that, so I'm actually quite sad I missed that whole last like 10, 15 seconds or something like that. So man, that's a bummer. But I know it's about Hex and about how I think I got the gist of it, unfortunately, but I wish I got the whole thing.
Just basically that,
Man,
Hex is an amazing tool that penalizes bad actors and benefits good actors, and that's so that it's going to weed out the negative actors out of the system on its own, based on the immutable monetary policy was like the basis of it.
right. Okay, I got you. Yeah, and you're saying that's like more of a universal truth kind of thing in a sense.
That the technologies and the cryptocurrencies will continue to get better and better over time. That
Right.
that value will always travel to where it's treated best, and that's just a function of like the universal law of light, right? Like the sun is what gives all life, and then no darkness can stand in the face of the sun.
That is, I love the way you said that. Well, I know we're at the hour mark, and I don't want to cut this off, but I also want to be mindful of time and everything. I think this is probably a great place to end here. To be honest, I think we've covered everything, and I got one last question that I wanted to ask you from my end. Unless you, and if there's anything else you want to bring up as well, I'd love to give you the opportunity to share whatever you're hoping to. But I wanted to ask one question: what is AXiS ALiVE? And shout out to Liberty or Death. What does AXiS ALiVE mean or stand for?
So AXiS ALiVE is it. I came up with the term in 2011, and I try not to say the story too much because part of the mastery of the name is the mystery of it. But
Okay.
the short of it is, there's an axis here on the bottom of this chart. There's an X and a Y axis. So for those that can navigate through life and stay in alignment, they're going to be on that origin point or that AXiS ALiVE, right? They're going to be on that place where they're in line with their highest self, and they're going to be in a position of power in their life. So AXiS ALiVE is really a state of being more than it is anything else, and any of us can be that, so long as we're true to ourselves and we trust our gut, our intuition, and just be headed somewhere. Just don't be going with going nowhere. Go somewhere, and hopefully you're trying to refine and improve that existence as it goes along. So AXiS ALiVE is the origin point or the 0 point, right? That which can be everywhere and nowhere at once. I wish that for everybody.
Damn, AXiS ALiVE is a state of being. I love that. That's so cool. That's probably I did not expect that, but also I'm not surprised that it's as profound as it is. That's super dope, man.
Yeah. So like last thing before we go, Sway P wanted me to apologize for being right about this 12-cent price call. So yeah. So I mean, I've been all the way since the bottom in January. I was saying price can go parabolic here. We could go. I was even saying we could go try to test the highs. But I had drawn this channel, many months ago. I think price was under the 200-day moving average back here. And, I was saying like 12 to 20 cents was the range. Well, we hit like 13 and a half on some of the pairs. So I'm not going to feel too bad about that. If you caught any of this wave, you caught anywhere from from a 2x to potentially a 7x. So yeah, I can't be too upset about that. Unfortunately, we had a lull, right? Going into this mainnet, people testnet V3 launched, people sold the news, and it is what it is, man. This is setting up to be quite a spectacular run up for the price. I mean, you got to be thinking further than just tomorrow. right? And so when you put an extension tool on this thing from the low to the high, the local high, back to where we just formed support at 200-day moving average here around 4.8 cents. You know, your 1618 target's still sitting at $1.12, and then the 2618 after that is at $7. So assuming we don't get any more downside, you know, Hex has got a history of hitting the 2618 right back here on big payday. I'm pretty sure this top actually overperformed here. So this is the 2618. I think it only had to get to 31 cents to overperform that. We ended up going to 56 cents. So
and look at how those overlay. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, assuming we can, you know, assuming that this is the bottom here, then your next 2618 level is 785 per unit. But you know, if you've been listening to me the last couple of days on stream, I've been saying that, you know, post fork, post fork, we could see this thing drop anywhere upwards of 60% below the 200-day moving average, which would get you down to this bottom trend line, and then that would put your 2618 target around $4, a little over $4. So 444 actually, to be exact. So keep that in mind, you guys. You know, it's like on a long enough time frame, I'm gonna be right. You know.
I love that. That's, yeah, man. I'm always astounded by how precise the way you're able to put all this together is. And it almost always, because TA, you know, you hear the mantra like, TA is just like, what is it? Astronomy for men. But, you know, you also go and you see how well things fit and you're like, okay, well, you can't deny it. Like, it's crazy. So it won't shock me when within a percentage, it's pretty much bang on to
There's just so much that I don't say, because when you really start digging into these charts, there's lines, it's called like lines of confluence, like not just lines, but the indicators can line up, the fundamentals can line up, and you start adding in other things like Metcalfe's law and other things. If you start getting that increased adoption rate, that can affect even more upside. Like the data points to me are saying that this is still going to be a pretty good year for Hex. And you know, most people pay me for that kind of information. So I just want to say that, you know, if you're discouraged by the most recent price action, get a longer time horizon, take advantage of sub 10-cent Hex, because once it's gone forever, right? And I've been saying that for a while.
Mm-hmm. It's only going to last so long. And like, what's 10 cents? Even if you get it 10 cents on the way to $1 or $2 or $3, versus instead of getting it at 4 or 5, you're not going to care at that point. But it's not going to last forever. There's a meme that Johnny Chaos has. It's like, I'm buy the dip, and it's guy running down the dip, and he's got the I'm buying the dip,
wasn't I?
Yeah. Oh, standing in the dip, and and it's got boom the candles, and it's I was standing in the dip, wasn't I? And that's coming very soon.
Yeah, man, this chart is like a mathematical anomaly, and I just want people to remember that and not get so caught up in the day to day. Like, this here reminds me a lot of back here, and that's all I can say about that. So
okay,
I hope that helps.
There. That's some free alpha right there, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm sad it's taken this long, but I'm also so happy that we're finally here and we actually get to speak and go off on so many great subjects. And I'm looking forward to the next time we speak as well.
We will definitely have to do this again. It was enjoyable. And we got a lot of good things said here today. So shout out to Cryptographics for providing such great content. And honestly, that handbook that you wrote was amazing. And, you know, I'm glad that you put that together. It's one of the most comprehensive documents on the entire ecosystem from top to bottom. So shout out to you for putting that together, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I got to shout out Crypto Vince too, because I could not have put that together without him or publisher Boris. So those guys.
Vince, if you're listening to this, bro, you still owe me some information. We're supposed to be working on something, so make sure you send that over to me. We don't want to get that too far behind.
No.
And shout out to Crypto Vince. He's an amazing guy for the system too.
Yep. Vince is amazing. And on that note, thanks for being here, man. I can't wait for the next one. Where can people find you? Do you have anything coming up that you want to shill or talk about? Yeah, I'll leave the floor to you for a moment here.
Yeah, this is my last stream this week. I did 4 in a row. We're 4 for 4 the last 4 days, so I'm done for the week. But we'll be coming back next week with some more fire content. I might even do my own solo stream this weekend. We'll see. But let's see, coming up, I got a charting 101 course I'm working on. Obviously, I released, or maybe you don't know this, I release chart sets fairly regularly. I put one out yesterday, so if you want to check that out, go to the website, AXiSlive.com, click on chart sets. It's under there. What else? Oh, could you run giveaways on here?
On
StreamYard?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I have to look into that.
All right.
I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, we'll hold off this time, but there's a
Okay.
check into there's like a plugin that you can get. You can do like a giveaway. I was gonna come to my next stream, everybody. We're gonna be giving away another one of those, The Power of Hex books by the two Germans that put together that book as well. And maybe you, honestly, this is a good shift for you. Like maybe you should be giving out physical copies or something. I don't know. That'd be cool of your own book.
That's a good idea. I've thought about that, and I think you're onto something there with that.
For sure. And then let's see what else. I think that's it. Oh yeah, the coursework, the charting 101 course, and then there's a couple coming up. I know a lot of people were curious about the LP. You took the LP course.
Amazing course.
Thoughts? Okay, cool. He liked it. Obviously, you guys know Cryptographics is a smart dude. He provided tremendous value to the course. We had over 125 signups. And people were in there. Everyone was asking questions, but Cryptographics was asking amazing questions that was really adding value. So props to him for being in there. And I think he genuinely did get value and knowledge from that. And we'll be running the LP course again after CryptoSloth's done with his boards exam. So look for that in June.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in real quick and say that I legitimately got so much out of that. There was a lot of foundational stuff that I maybe knew, but was put in a way that was reaffirming and making sure that little holes and things that even if you knew LP were filled in. And then it got into just so much depth and nuance that you don't normally see, that was so far past what the cost of emission was in terms of value, that I would more than recommend anyone who wants to learn anything of any one of these courses to sign up. They are more than worth the price tag of admission.
Thank you, sir. Yep. So keep on the lookout for that. Go check me out on twitter.com/AXisAlive or at AXisAlive, AXisAlive.com. Be looking forward to doing this again soon. All right.
Man, me too. All right, guys. Thank you so much with that. I see there's over 200 of us here. Thank you all for coming and hanging out and listening to this amazing conversation. You know what to do. Go subscribe, the whole 9 yards. You want coaching? I got links in the description as well. Go check out AXiS's website. We will see you guys very soon in a stream near you, and have a great rest of your week. Peace.
Thanks.